What? It's Avenged? Yeah, hooray! Ha! Well done. How many battleships? Right, what? None. But a few planes, so it's the same thing. I don't know about that. February 6, 1942. We see it this week in Singapore, what we've seen throughout the war whenever it first reaches a new city or country or part of the world. Civilians misunderstanding the hard facts of being at war. We're not involved. Well, they're learning in Singapore they are very much involved. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Americans won a small naval victory, but were retreating to new defense lines in the Philippines. The British and Malayan forces were retreating to Singapore, the Soviet advances were stalling, Benghazi fell to the Axis in North Africa, and the Japanese began attacks in Burma, the Solomon Islands, and Amboina. Japanese attacks continue this week. On the 31st, they take Molamine, Burma, threatening Rangoon. On the 3rd, they bomb Port Moresby. By the 4th, they finish taking Amboina. Martin Gilbert writes that 809 Australians surrender. 426 of them are bayoneted to death. The next day, 30 Australian and Dutch POWs are beheaded by sword or killed by bayonet at Rabaul. By the 31st, the last Australian forces in Malaya have withdrawn to Singapore, where they join British, Indian, Canadian, and Malayan troops there, awaiting a Japanese attack. Singapore is Britain's Gibraltar of the Far East, but its vulnerability has been, of course, a huge issue for Archie Wavell and ABDA Command since it was established 6 weeks ago. Even in peacetime, the task of coordinating the land, sea, and air forces of 4 nations would have been formidable, but Wavell, and his staff, had only days to weld together a command literally under the fire of enemy attacks. Their best endeavors were frustrated by national rivalries and the vast extent of the perimeter they were being called on to defend, as much by the rising tempo of the Japanese offensive. They were all handicapped by the ABDA directive requiring their units, where possible, to operate as national entities, which left their forces widely scattered and without any previous experience of operating together. The combined forces lacked essential common codes at the very time when it was necessary to concentrate against the Japanese. On the 31st itself, General Arthur Percival's order of the day, as the final soldiers start to cross the causeway, is, "Our task is to hold this fortress until help can come, as assuredly as it will come." Imperial troops spend the rest of the week under frequent air raids, feverishly working to build up the defenses that had been neglected pre-war. Thing is, the Japanese have an excellent view of all of that. From the Sultan of Johore's palace, which the British did not destroy in their retreat, General Tomoyuki Yamashita and his staff watch the goings-on through field glasses. They have no trouble at all ranging their artillery for the coming assault, and they bring up 300 collapsible assault boats and hide them in the jungle. Percival has 85,000 men to dig in and make what preparations he can, but it seems like he might make the same mistake Douglas MacArthur made in the initial defense of the Philippines and concentrate all his forces at the water's edge. Governor Sir Shenton Thomas announces that Singapore will be an epic in imperial history, since he's convinced they have more than enough men and supplies for the job of defending. There is a problem with civilians, though. They take issue with things like the army digging trenches across the golf course, and insist on proper written orders from high authority, which wastes a lot of time. Though by the end of the week, under the air raids, they eventually realize what danger they're in, especially when the liner Empress of Asia is bombed and sunk in the Channel the 5th. It's been used as a troop transport during the war. On the 4th, Japanese demands for the surrender of Singapore are rejected, and when the week ends, the Japanese are poised to strike. The Allies have also withdrawn to a stronghold to defend on the Philippines, as we've seen. The Battle of the Pockets continues this week on Bataan Peninsula. The American and Filipino counterattacks are strong and merciless. 377 Japanese of the 20th Regiment and its commander managed to escape, but except for 3 wounded captured, the rest of the regiment is killed. The U.S. Navy is attacking at sea again this week in the Marshalls-Gilberts Raids on the 1st. For 5 hours this morning, Admiral William Halsey sends airstrikes from the carrier Enterprise against Kwajalein, Tarawa, and Wachi in the Marshall Islands, while cruisers and destroyers bombard Tarawa and Wachi. All told, they sink 3 small warships, damage a few more, including a light cruiser, and destroy 15 planes. The Enterprise loses 5 dive bombers and a fighter. Further south, carrier Yorktown sends planes to hit Makin, Mili, and Jaluit. They destroy 3 Japanese planes, but lose 4 torpedo bombers and 3 dive bombers. Weather there prevents Admiral Fletcher from achieving better results. But, the American press can and do report that the Pacific Fleet is on the attack, and the headlines read, Pearl Harbor Avenged.
This was how the Marshall and Gilbert Islands were put out of action. We hope for more offensives of this kind in the future. For the time being, we must be content with mainly defense measures in the Far East War. But make no doubt of it, Allied naval power will return to the attack in the Pacific. This was just the beginning.
But though that really is only limited success, it's still more successful than Admiral Thomas Hart's multinational ABDA fleet. Now as Japan began moving towards Java and Sumatra, the 4 Allied naval forces were combined into a single squadron of 8 cruisers and 20 destroyers. It was a puny force with which to challenge the Japanese battleship, cruiser, and carrier strike force that had been brought in to protect the final advance to the Dutch East Indies. On the 1st, Japanese air raids drive Hart's fleets to Cilacap on Java's south coast. On the 4th, Fleet Commander Rear Admiral Karel Doorman takes the strike force into the Makassar Straits, trying to intercept an invasion convoy, but they're attacked by 60 Japanese medium bombers and are forced to withdraw after a couple of cruisers are damaged. Allied naval intelligence also has a setback this week on the 1st, when German U-boat command alters an Enigma machine as a security protocol. This ends the British capability of reading German submarine movements in the Atlantic and Mediterranean. Also, British codes carrying intel on North Atlantic shipping convoys are broken by German naval intelligence. So the pendulum in the intelligence war has just really swung away from the British. In naval operations themselves, in January, the Germans had 91 operating U-boats, with 158 in training or testing, 64 in the Atlantic, 23 in the Mediterranean, and 4 in the Arctic. The Allies lost 106 ships in January for 419,900 tons. Also, with Fliegerkorps 2 of the Luftwaffe established in the Mediterranean, the Germans and Italians have bombed Malta heavily enough to prevent the British from sending out missions to sabotage Axis supplies bound for North Africa. So a lot of stuff has gotten through, and it's also been very hard for the British themselves to send anything to supply Malta. And German Commander Erwin Rommel has been considering further attacks on the weakened British after those of the past 2 weeks. But now on the 4th, he gets word that no more supplies are going to reach him for some time. So he'll wait in the Jebel, knowing that it's going to be 5 or 6 weeks at least until the enemy is in a position to attack him. The Allies have retreated to hold their lines at Gazala. Rommel has won a pretty strong tactical victory. In 2 weeks, he pushed the 8th Army back 550 kilometers and, at pretty little cost to himself, has taken or destroyed 70 tanks and cost the Allies 1,390 men. The latest reverse to British arms caused understandable consternation. Fundamentally, the issue was simple. The British had not only badly overreached their administrative resources, but had deployed their forces in a fashion likely to invite attack at a time when the 8th Army lacked the strength to meet it with a fair chance of success. And Auchinleck had repeated Wavell's mistake of badly underestimating the enemy's power of recovery. And 8th Army Commander Neil Ritchie has made it impossible for Alfred Godwin Austen to continue as commander of 13th Corps. Ritchie disregarded his advice and personally ordered the 4th Indian Division, part of the Corps. Godwin Austen asks to be relieved of his command the 2nd. it cannot feel good to all concerned that he was proved right about events. Now, before you write in, of course, Ritchie has the right to override his subordinates. But whereas an override of Godwin Austen, like Theater Commander Claude Auchinleck's, which we saw back in November, was based on the advice of several men of much experience and an analysis of the events unfolding in the field, Ritchie, who is inexperienced, overruled the more experienced Godwin Austen, took no advice, and acted from what seems to be wishful thinking more than any actual study of the situation. Well, whatever the case, the situation now for both sides is consolidation as a lull sets in. And that might be happening in parts of the Eastern Front as well. The January crisis for German Army Group Center seems to be fading a bit now that February is here. The Soviet attacks to the south are being held back beyond Sukhinichi. The Germans still have Vyazma and Rzhev. Cholm and Veliki Luki still hold out. And yet, Joseph Stalin and Stavka are still optimistic about the destruction of Army Group Center. In fact, on the 1st, Stalin reestablishes the Western Theater Command under Georgy Zhukov. He is to coordinate the actions of the Western and Kalinin fronts to seize Vyazma, surround the Germans at Rzhev and Sechovka, and thus destroy the main force of Army Group Center. Well, it's a tall order, certainly at Rzhev, and to get to Vyazma, there's a lot of German forces to defeat. And still, Zhukov now makes preparations to throw everything he has left at the Germans. He issues orders for the strike on Vyazma the 4th with the 11th Cavalry around 10 kilometers west of it along the Minsk-Moscow highway. Pavel Belov's 1st Guards Cavalry and Mikhail Yefremov's 33rd Army are advancing from the south and southeast. But they're cut off from behind by the Germans. They've been getting aid and supplies from partisans and paratroops. They decide to combine forces. But to their great surprise, Western Front Headquarters says no to that. A few days of fighting brings no breakthrough at Vyazma, and the German mortar fire is deadly, especially at night when bombers drop both flares and bombs on the brightly lit targets. Belov manages to contact large groups of partisans, and Andrei Yeremenko's 4th Shock Army coordinates with other partisan groups. Many partisans are now armed, and they in turn supply food to the shock armies. Belov even gets permission to fill up his ranks with partisans, since many are former Red Army soldiers. Over the next month, he will recruit just about 2,500 men into the 1st Guards Cavalry. A German army report from the 1st notes, since we have no continuous forward line, traffic of every kind from the Soviet side and back again is possible, and extensive use is being made of such crossings. New partisan bands have infiltrated. Russian parachutes have dropped and are taking over leadership. In partisan action further north, the 2nd Leningrad Partisan Brigade even gets a printing press dropped in and begins to print its own paper, the People's Avenger. There is even increasing partisan activity in occupied Yugoslavia. On the 5th, the British begin Operation Disclaim, the parachute insertion of a mission near Sarajevo to link up with Draža Mihailović's Chetniks. The 4 men dropping in are caught by the Croats shortly after landing and handed over to the Germans. Operation Hydra also kicks off this week on the 4th when 2 British SOE agents and a former officer of the Yugoslav Air Force go ashore in Montenegro to contact the partisans under Josip Broz Tito. Jumping ahead into the future, after April 22nd, they are never seen again. And here are some notes to end the week. By the 31st in Leningrad, more than 200,000 people have died of starvation or cold in the 5 months of the siege. They do still have that little alleyway of hope across Lake Ladoga. After the minor successes of the Soviets the past couple of weeks, a shorter journey across the ice is possible, one that can take as little as 2 hours. Over the next 3 months or so, over 500,000 people will be transported to safety. On the 1st, the U.S. auto industry stops production and switches over to war material for the next 12 months. That same day, Vidkun Quisling becomes Minister-President of German-occupied Norway. On the 6th is the first meeting of the Allied Combined Chiefs of Staff. And this week, Karl Jaeger, head of the Order Police in Lithuania, reports meticulously to Berlin that in the past 7 months, his special forces have killed 138,272 Jews, 1,064 Russian communists, 56 Soviet partisans, 44 Poles, 28 Soviet POWs, 5 Romani, and 1 Armenian. And that brings me to the end of the week. A week full of real worry for the future in Singapore, Japanese gains around that whole area of the world, a naval victory for the US, action both on and behind the lines in the Soviet Union. You can picture it, right? Young man, why are you digging up our golf course? The Japanese are about to attack, ma'am. I hardly think they shall be attacking the golf course. Why, do they even play golf in Japan? Don't know, ma'am, but no one's gonna play it here for a while, that's for sure. Insert the sound of Japanese medium bombers arriving and dropping their loads. The lady understands. As do they all sooner or later, for there is no such thing as a bystander in modern war. And before you write in, no, I have no idea why it was an American soldier who was digging up the golf course right now. That just came out that way. As for the bombers, if you'd like to learn more about planes, guns, and automobiles early in the interwar period, check out our Between Two Wars episode about that right here. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Muhammad. Thanks to Muhammad and the rest of the army, we can make content like all of this and that special and all the Time Ghost stuff and all the World War II stuff and the War Against Humanity series and On the Home Front and Across the Airwaves and all the specials and everything we do. So join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Do not forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.